Good evening, my dear friends and esteemed fellow investigators. Captain Arthur Hastings here, ready to share another of my astonishing adventures alongside the one and only Hercule Poirot. One might imagine, after a lifetime of such escapades, that the world would cease to surprise me, but I assure you, with Poirot by my side, every case presents a fresh labyrinth for the mind, a new tapestry of human folly and ingenuity to unravel. This particular enigma, involving a rather peculiar piece of luggage, tested even Poirot's remarkable patience, but ultimately yielded to the relentless probing of his little grey cells. If you enjoy such tales of deduction and discovery, I do implore you to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring these stories to light. Now, let's begin with the first chapter of the Locked Suitcase Mystery. Chapter 1. The Antiquarian's Demise. It was a dreary November morning, the kind that London specializes in, where the fog seemed to cling not just to the cobblestones, but to one's very soul. Poirot, ever disdainful of inclement weather, had been meticulously polishing his patent leather boots when the insistent ring of our doorbell shattered the morning's quietude. Inspector Japp, his face etched with a familiar mixture of weariness and intrigue, stood on our doorstep, clutching his bowler hat. "Poirot," he began without preamble, "we've got a rum one this time. Wealthy old Julian Thorne, the antiquarian, found him this morning." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his head cocked slightly to one side. "Julian Thorne, you say? A man of esoteric tastes, if my memory serves. What precisely is the rum aspect of this particular situation, mon ami?" "Well, that's just it." Japp scratched his chin. "He was found in his study, collapsed in his armchair. No signs of struggle, no obvious cause. His butler, Henderson, discovered him when he went to deliver his morning tea. Says he looked peaceful, if you can believe it. But here's the kicker. Beside him, on a small oriental rug, was a rather peculiar old leather suitcase, locked tight, and Henderson swears it wasn't there last night." My heart gave a little thump of anticipation. This was precisely the sort of odd detail that would pique Poirot's interest. He exchanged a knowing glance with me. "A locked suitcase, eh? Not belonging to the deceased? Intriguing indeed. Lead the way, Japp." The journey to Thorne's imposing Victorian mansion in Kensington Gore was a silent one, punctuated only by the clatter of the cab on the wet streets. The house itself stood like a fortress, cloaked in ivy, an air of quiet grandeur about it. Inside, the hushed elegance spoke of generations of wealth and discretion. We were led to the study, a cavernous room lined floor to ceiling with books and objets d'art, smelling faintly of old paper and beeswax. Mr. Julian Thorne lay slumped in a high-backed velvet armchair, a half-finished cup of tea, now cold, on a nearby occasional table. He was a man of perhaps 60 years, with a finely chiseled face and a shock of white hair. He looked, as Japp had observed, remarkably tranquil, as if merely asleep. The air, though, felt heavy, as if holding its breath. Poirot surveyed the scene with an almost frightening intensity. His eyes, keen and unblinking, swept over every detail, the precisely arranged stacks of ancient manuscripts, the glimmer of polished silver on a desk, the faint impression of a teacup on a coaster. Then his gaze fell upon the object of Japp's curiosity, the suitcase. It was an old-fashioned piece, perhaps from the turn of the century, made of dark, aged leather, reinforced with brass studs, and secured with 2 intricate clasps and a central lock. It looked sturdy, well-traveled, yet somehow out of place amidst Thorne's refined, static collection. It bore no initials, no identifying marks. "Magnifique," Poirot murmured, not in admiration of the deceased, but of the puzzle itself. He knelt gingerly, examining the case without touching it, his expression unreadable. "Observe, Hastings, the dust. A fine layer covers the surface of the case, suggesting it has been undisturbed for some time, yet Japp tells us it was not here last night. A paradox, non? I peered closer. Indeed, the dust seemed uniform, almost as if it had settled naturally over weeks, not hours. Perhaps it was moved from another part of the house, Poirot. Poirot merely shook his head, a slight frown creasing his brow. Or it arrived from elsewhere, and observed the position, Hastings. Not casually discarded, placed with a certain deliberation, perhaps. Mr. Henderson, the butler, a tall, gaunt man with a perpetually somber expression, entered the study. His movements were precise, almost mechanical. "Inspector," he acknowledged Japp with a stiff nod. He seemed unruffled, a paragon of British stoicism, even in the face of his employer's mysterious demise. "Henderson," Japp began, "can you tell us anything more about Mr. Thorne's habits? Did he expect any visitors yesterday evening?" "Mr. Thorne kept to himself, Inspector," Henderson replied, his voice a low monotone. "He dined alone, as was his custom. He spent his evenings reading or cataloguing his collection. No visitors were expected, nor did any arrive. To my knowledge, he retired to his study after supper, and I bid him good night around 10 o'clock. "And the suitcase?" Poirot interjected, finally rising to his feet. "Have you ever seen this particular item before, monsieur?" Henderson's eyes, devoid of emotion, rested briefly on the leather case. "No, Monsieur Poirot, I have never seen it. Mr. Thorne possessed many curious objects, but this is not one I recognize from his personal effects or his collection. His usual travel cases are stored in the attic." "And you are quite certain it was not here last night?" Japp pressed. "Absolutely, Inspector. I tidied the study personally yesterday afternoon. That case was not present. It appeared sometime between 10 last night and 7 this morning, when I discovered Mr. Thorne." Henderson's voice remained level, betraying nothing. Poirot picked up the cold teacup. "Mr. Thorne's last repast, perhaps. Was he fond of any particular infusion?" "Earl Grey, Monsieur Poirot, with a slice of lemon." "Always." Henderson's gaze flickered to the cup. Poirot sniffed the faint aroma in the cup. "Indeed. Hastings, notice the placement of the lamp. It illuminates not the book Mr. Thorne was reading, but rather the empty wall beside it. A small detail, but one that suggests a distraction, perhaps, or a sudden interruption." I nodded, trying to follow his train of thought. It was true. The lamplight fell oddly. The book Thorne had been reading, a weighty tome on ancient Sumerian artifacts, lay open, face down, on the desk. "And the lock on the suitcase?" Poirot continued, directing his gaze back to the mystery object. "It is of a rather intricate design. A challenge, perhaps, for even the most accomplished of lock-pickers. Yet it appears undisturbed. No marks of forced entry. It holds its secrets well, this suitcase." Japp sighed, running a hand over his face. "So, we've got a dead man, no obvious cause, and a locked suitcase that appeared out of nowhere. No signs of a forced entry to the house, Henderson?" "None, Inspector. All windows and doors were secured as usual." Poirot stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Ah, the locked room mystery, but with an added layer of an uninvited locked object. Formidable. We must open this suitcase, Japp. Carefully. Without damage. For I have a distinct feeling, my friend, that its contents will tell us much, perhaps everything, about the unfortunate Mr. Thorne and his sudden departure from this world. But where, I ask you, does one find a master of antique locks at such short notice and on such a miserable day?" Chapter 2. The Antiquary's Key. Poirot, never one to be deterred by a mere locked object, or by London's pervasive gloom, decreed that our next port of call must be a place where objects held stories and skilled hands could coax them forth. He declared, with a flourish of his gloved hand, that only a connoisseur of forgotten mechanisms would do. Thus we found ourselves, only hours later, amidst the vibrant, cacophonous energy of Portobello Road Market. The fog of Kensington had given way to a weak, watery sunlight filtering through the clouds, illuminating the bustling stalls and the colourful array of goods on display. The air was thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts, old books, and damp wool. Poirot navigated the crowded thoroughfare with surprising agility, his short stature allowing him to slip between larger figures. I, being of a more substantial build, found myself frequently apologizing. He seemed to possess an internal compass for finding the truly unique among the piles of trinkets and treasures. "Ah, here we are, Hastings," he announced, stopping before a particularly cluttered stall overflowing with antique clocks, ornate keys, and polished wooden boxes. A sign, half obscured by a dusty velvet curtain, read, "B's Curios." Behind the counter sat a woman of formidable presence. Mrs. Beatrice B. Plum was a whirlwind of floral scarves and jangling bracelets, her face a road map of cheerful wrinkles, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She was in the midst of haggling with a portly gentleman over a chipped porcelain figurine, her voice a delightful, booming contralto. No, darling, you insult my grandmother's memory. This cherub has seen more history than you've had hot dinners. 50 shillings and not a farthing less," she declared, finally securing her price with a triumphant grin. Poirot approached, a polite smile on his face. "Madame Plum, if I may interrupt your commerce for a moment. We seek your unique expertise." Bay Plum turned her attention to us, her eyes twinkling. "Well, bless my buttons if it isn't Monsieur Poirot. Heard about you, I have. My nephew, young Timothy, follows all your cases in the penny dreadfuls. What can old B do for the famous Belgian?" Jap, who had trailed us, produced a detailed sketch of the mysterious suitcase's lock, drawn by one of his constables under Poirot's careful direction. "We've a rather delicate situation, Mrs. Plum," he explained. "A locked antique suitcase. We need it opened without damage and without a key. This is the lock." Bay Plum took the sketch, her brow furrowed in concentration. She adjusted her spectacles, tracing the intricate lines with a gnarled finger. A fine piece of work, this. Not your common run-of-the-mill tumbler, this. This, my dears, is a chatelaine lock. French, early Victorian, I'd say. Very rare, very secure. Only a true artisan could craft such a thing, and only a truly patient hand could open it without the proper key. "Do you believe you could accomplish this, madame?" Poirot asked, his voice soft but insistent. B. Plum let out a hearty laugh. "Me? Bless your heart, Monsieur Poirot. My hands are too old and stiff for such delicate work now. I'm good for rattling a teacup, but not for picking a chatelaine. No, for this, you need a true master. There's only one man in London I'd trust with a lock like this. Old Silas Grimshaw. He lives down by the docks, near the Wapping Wall. Used to be a watchmaker, then a locksmith to the gentry. A bit of a hermit now, but his hands, they still have the magic." "Silas Grimshaw," Jap repeated, scribbling the name into his notebook. "Never heard of him." "That's because he likes to keep to himself, Inspector," B explained. "After a bit of a misunderstanding with the Duke's pocket watch and a rather scandalous affair, he rather retreated from society. But his skill is unmatched. He'll be in his workshop, I expect. Tell him B sent you. He'll grumble, but he'll listen." Poirot smiled, a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "Formidable. Your knowledge is invaluable, Madame Plum. We are much obliged." As we prepared to depart, B. Plum leaned in conspiratorially. "Monsieur Poirot, if it's the Thorn case you're working on, there's been talk, you know. He was a reclusive man, but he had a reputation, a collector of the unusual, whispers of items with rather dark histories passing through his hands. And he wasn't always fair in his dealings, if you catch my meaning. Some folks had reason to resent old Thorn. Just a thought for your little grey cells." She winked, then turned back to haggling over a tarnished silver locket. The revelation that Thorn might have made enemies added another layer to the mystery. The journey to Wapping Wall was a stark contrast to the lively market. We descended into an older, grimier London, where the fog began to creep back in, mingling with the industrial smoke from the chimneys. The narrow streets were slick with grime, and the air was heavy with the smell of coal and the distant tang of the Thames. Silas Grimshaw's workshop was a dilapidated edifice nestled between two derelict warehouses. The windows were grimy, and the door looked as though it hadn't been painted in decades. A small, hand-painted sign, barely legible, read, "Grimshaw, Timepieces and Mechanisms." A gruff voice from within barked, "Who's there? If it's another damned bill collector, you can take your business elsewhere." Poirot, ever the diplomat, cleared his throat. "Monsieur Grimshaw, we are here on the recommendation of Madame Plum. We have a rather unique problem, requiring your unique talents." A moment of silence, then a creak as the door grudgingly opened a sliver. An elderly man, with spectacles perched on his nose and hands that seemed perpetually stained with oil and metal dust, peered out. His eyes, though wary, held an undeniable spark of intelligence. "B, you say? That old busybody. What mischief has she sent you on now?" Grimshaw grumbled, but he allowed us entry. His workshop was a cluttered wonderland of gears, springs and cogs, the air thick with the scent of metal and old wood. After Poirot explained the situation and presented the drawing of the lock, Grimshaw studied it intently. "A chatelaine indeed," he muttered, a flicker of professional interest in his eyes. "Rare, beautiful craftsmanship. Yes, I can open it, but it will take time, and absolute silence, and I want to see the case, not just a drawing." "The case is with the police," Japp explained. "We can arrange for it to be brought to you if you agree to take on the task. The matter is of grave importance." Grimshaw considered this, running a calloused thumb over the sketch. "Very well, a true challenge. Bring the case, but don't expect miracles instantly. These old beauties, they have a stubborn pride, you see. They don't give up their secrets easily, and I work alone. Come back tomorrow afternoon." "No sooner." Poirot nodded, his expression one of complete satisfaction. "As you wish, Monsieur Grimshaw. We thank you for your invaluable assistance. We shall return tomorrow." As we left the workshop and stepped back into the grey dampness of the London docks, I felt a surge of excitement. The little grey cells were at work, and soon the locked suitcase would yield its secrets. What, I wondered, would we find inside? And how would it connect to the quiet demise of Mr. Julian Thorne? The anticipation was almost unbearable. Chapter 3. Whispers from the Past. The following afternoon we returned to Silas Grimshaw's workshop, the mysterious suitcase carefully transported by Japp's men. The old locksmith, true to his word, had been working in solitude. The air inside his dusty workshop now hummed with a quiet intensity. After several hours of painstaking work, punctuated by the occasional soft click and whir of specialized tools, Grimshaw finally sat back, a triumphant glint in his eye. "There," he announced with a gruff satisfaction. "The old girl yields. A beautiful mechanism, truly. No forced entry, no damage done. It opens." He unfastened the clasps, and with a soft, almost reverent sigh, lifted the lid. We all crowded forward, our breaths held, peering into the depths of the antique case, expecting perhaps jewels or a cache of illicit documents. We were met instead with something far more perplexing. Inside lay not valuables, but a collection of aged, yellowed documents meticulously tied with faded ribbon. There were several old shipping manifests dated from the 1880s, detailing cargo voyages to various colonial outposts. Alongside these were a handful of sepia-toned photographs of a severe-looking woman and a younger, smiling man in explorer's gear, both unfamiliar. Most intriguing, however, was a small, ornately carved wooden box, no larger than a cigar case, which Silas carefully lifted out. It too was locked, but with a simpler, less formidable lock. "Another lock, monsieur?" Poirot asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. Grimshaw grumbled good-naturedly. "This one, a mere trinket. I can open it in a moment." And indeed, with a flick of a slender pick, the tiny box sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single tarnished silver locket, unengraved, and a small folded piece of parchment. Poirot carefully unfolded the parchment. It contained a single, elegantly penned word, "Viridian." "Viridian," Poirot mused aloud, his brow furrowed in thought. "A colour, of course, but also a surname. Or a place, a code, perhaps." The contents were baffling. Nothing immediately pointed to Julian Thorne or to his death. The shipping manifests seemed archaic, the photographs anonymous, the locket mundane, and the word "Viridian" enigmatic. "This is all very interesting, Poirot, but how does this connect to old Thorne?" Japp asked, clearly exasperated. "It seems like a collection of dusty old junk." "Ah, but my dear Japp," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with intellectual hunger, "sometimes the most innocent-seeming objects are the most dangerous. This suitcase, its very existence at the scene, is no coincidence. It is a key, I assure you, to understanding Mr. Thorne's final moments. These documents, they speak of voyages, the photographs, of lives lived long ago, and Viridian. That is the most intriguing piece of all." "Our next destination," Poirot declared, "would be a place where the passage of time was recorded, where the ghosts of journeys past lingered in the very air." He wanted to ascertain if these shipping manifests or the individuals in the photographs might have had a more contemporary connection. This led us, rather dramatically, to the grand echoing concourse of Victoria Station. The station was a bustling hive of activity, a vibrant tapestry of human endeavour. Steam hissed from mighty locomotives, porters shouted, and the air was thick with the scent of coal smoke, damp wool, and hurried departures. It was a stark contrast to the quiet intellectualism of Thorne's study or Grimshaw's workshop. Poirot, ever observant, scanned the faces in the crowd. Each journey, Hastings, a story, each arrival, a new beginning. We seek a story that has perhaps been forgotten, yet still casts a shadow. Japp had arranged for us to speak with Mr. Silas Jenkins, the head station master, a man of immense girth and a perpetually harassed expression. He knew little of historical manifests, but pointed us towards Miss Emily Dove, a senior ticket clerk known for her prodigious memory and penchant for detail, who had worked at Victoria for over 20 years. Miss Dove was a slender woman with neat grey hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She sat behind her grill methodically sorting tickets. When Japp explained our purpose, she listened patiently, her expression unreadable. Poirot presented her with one of the older photographs, depicting the young man in explorer's gear. "Miss Dove, by any chance, does this gentleman, or indeed this style of uniform or luggage, evoke any memory in your exceptional mind? From the earlier days, perhaps?" Miss Dove took the photograph, her gaze lingering on it. She looked remarkably serious for a moment, then a faint smile touched her lips. "Well, I never," she murmured. "This is quite something. The uniform is from the Royal Geographical Society's expeditions, late 1880s to early 1890s. My father was quite the enthusiast, and the face, it's familiar somehow. Not a regular traveller, I'd remember, but the luggage. Ah, yes. I remember a very similar case to the one you described, Monsieur Poirot. Not this gentleman's, no. But a few weeks ago, a woman, elderly, very frail. She was travelling alone, clutching a ticket to Dover, then onward to France. She had a suitcase, identical to the one you sketched for Mr. Grimshaw, the same French chatelaine lock, the same brass fittings. She seemed rather distressed, agitated. "A woman?" I exclaimed, surprised. "Travelling with a case belonging to Thorne?" Not belonging to Mr. Thorne Hastings, Poirot corrected gently. Belonging to someone who perhaps intended for it to reach Mr. Thorne or vice versa. Tell us more, Miss Dove. This distressed woman, do you recall her name? Miss Dove tapped her chin. Her name. It was unusual. I remember it because she had some difficulty spelling it out. Ah, Viridian. Mrs. Eleanor Viridian. She was quite insistent that her luggage be handled with the utmost care. I remember because she kept saying, "This case holds a lifetime." She looked very old, but her eyes, they were full of a fire, a fierce determination. Poirot's eyes lit up with triumph. Viridian, magnifique, the very word written on the parchment. This is no mere coincidence, Hastings. Miss Dove, you have provided a most crucial piece of the puzzle. Tell me, did Mrs. Viridian mention anything else? Her destination beyond Dover, perhaps? Or any contact in London? Miss Dove shook her head. No, Monsieur Poirot, just that she was meeting a gentleman of antiquarian interests in France on a matter of urgent historical importance. She gave no name. She was quite secretive, actually, and she insisted on a particular porter handling her bag. A Mr. O'Malley, who worked the Dover line at the time, but he's retired now. Or rather, he moved to working down at the riverside warehouses, I hear. Poirot gave a slow, deliberate nod. Viridian, a name, a suitcase, a destination, and now a porter. The threads, they begin to weave themselves together. This Mrs. Eleanor Viridian, it seems, holds the key not just to the suitcase, but perhaps to Mr. Thorne's peculiar end. We must find this Mr. O'Malley, and perhaps, my friends, we must begin to understand the true nature of what Mr. Thorne was collecting, beyond mere antiquities. Chapter 4. The Warehouse's Secret. Armed with the name of Mrs. Eleanor Viridian and the lead of the retired porter, Mr. O'Malley, Poirot's deductive engine whirred into higher gear. He declared that the next stage of our investigation must take us to a place of commerce and forgotten goods, a place where transactions often occurred beneath the veneer of respectability. The riverside warehouses, he asserted, often held more than just cargo. They held secrets. The journey from the bustling energy of Victoria Station to the grimy industrial landscape of the London docks felt like stepping into another world, or perhaps a forgotten century. A fine drizzle had begun to fall, making the cobblestones slick and reflecting the anemic glow of the gas lamps. The air here was heavy with the smell of coal, brine, and something vaguely metallic. The towering brick warehouses loomed like silent sentinels, their windows dark and uninviting. We found Mr. O'Malley at a cavernous warehouse near Wapping, amidst towering stacks of crates and the distant creak of a winch. He was a burly man, perhaps in his late 50s, with a weathered face, a grizzled beard, and a perpetually suspicious squint. He was directing a team of younger, muscled men in loading goods onto a barge, his booming voice cutting through the damp air. The scene was one of hard labor, of physical toil, a stark contrast to Thorne's scholarly study. Japp approached him first, showing his police identification. "Mr. O'Malley, we'd like a word with you, regarding a Mrs. Eleanor Viridian and a particular piece of luggage." O'Malley scowled, wiping a gloved hand across his brow. "Viridian, you say? Haven't heard that name in donkey's years. What's this about? I'm a busy man." His eyes, however, held a flicker of recognition, a hint of unease. Poirot, ever patient, stepped forward. "Monsieur O'Malley, we understand you once worked as a porter at Victoria Station. Miss Emily Dove, a clerk there, mentioned you handled the luggage for a Mrs. Viridian several weeks ago. A distinctive old leather suitcase," she said. O'Malley grunted, kicking at a loose plank. I remember her. Old Biddy. Skittish as a cat on a hot tin roof. Insisted I take her case personal-like. Said it was valuable. Didn't look like much, just old leather. But she paid me extra. A crisp sovereign, she did. Said it was for my discretion." "Discretion, Monsieur O'Malley?" Poirot prompted gently. In what regard? The foreman hesitated, casting a wary glance around. She didn't want anyone else touching it, that's what. And she made me promise to make sure it was put on the Dover train. No detours. Said she had a feeling, a bad feeling, like someone was watching her, like someone might try to interfere with her journey. Did she mention who might be watching her? Or why? Japp inquired, his pen poised. O'Malley shook his head. Nah, just mumbled something about old grudges and treasures best left buried. Sounded a bit touched in the head, if you ask me. But she paid well, so I didn't ask questions. Just did as I was told. See her off on the Dover train, I did. Saw her carry that same case onto the ferry. She did, headed for France. That was the last I saw of her. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Treasures best left buried. An interesting turn of phrase. And you are certain she took the case with her to France? Positive, Governor. Watched her myself. Big old ferry she was. Over to Calais, I reckon. This was a troubling development. If Mrs. Viridian had taken the suitcase to France, how had it appeared in Julian Thorne's study? Had it been returned? Or was O'Malley mistaken? Monsieur O'Malley, Poirot continued. Did Mrs. Viridian mention Mr. Julian Thorne, the antiquarian, or perhaps his residence in Kensington Gore? O'Malley scratched his beard, thinking. Thorne, you say? The name rings a bell, but I can't place it. No, she didn't mention any names. Just a gentleman of antiquarian interests. That's all. But speaking of Thorne, he was a frequent visitor here, actually. Or rather, his agents were. Always looking for unusual shipments, old crates from abroad. He had a reputation for buying things, no questions asked, if they were unique. Mr. Thorne frequently acquired goods from these docks? Poirot asked, his tone suddenly sharper. Aye, that he did, O'Malley confirmed. Odd stuff mostly. Old statues, crates of obscure books, sometimes even things with no identifying marks. He liked his little secrets, old Thorne, but he paid well and he never caused any trouble. Never saw him down here himself, mind. Always sent a young chap, very quiet, scholarly type, always with a stack of specific papers. Always knew what he was looking for. A scholarly type, I repeated, intrigued. Yeah, thin, bespectacled. Didn't look like he belonged in a place like this. Always had his nose in a book even while waiting for a shipment. Gave me the creeps a bit. O'Malley shuddered slightly, despite the chill. This was a significant new lead. Julian Thorne, it seemed, had a deeper, perhaps shadier connection to the docks than his respectable facade suggested, and the mysterious scholarly type who acted as his agent. Did you ever see this scholarly gentleman in possession of a case such as Mrs. Viridian's? Poirot asked. Never, O'Malley stated firmly. He always carried a slim leather satchel, full of documents. Never a suitcase, and he was always focused on the cargo itself. Poirot stroked his mustache, his gaze sweeping over the dimly lit warehouse, the towering crates, the shadowy corners. So Mrs. Viridian took the suitcase to France, yet it reappeared in Mr. Thorne's study, and Mr. Thorne had a mysterious agent who frequented these very docks. The plot thickens, Hastings, does it not? We must consider the possibility that Mrs. Viridian did not make it to France with her luggage, or that the suitcase was intercepted. And this scholarly type, he bears investigation. And the contents of the suitcase, Poirot, I asked. The shipping manifests, the photographs, the locket, and the word Viridian. They are all pieces, Hastings, Poirot said, his voice quiet but firm. Each one a thread in a tangled skein. We must now unravel the meaning of Viridian and the significance of these old documents. For that, my friend, we require a different kind of repository for secrets, a place of quiet contemplation, of knowledge. He turned, his silhouette outlined against the watery light filtering through the warehouse doors. We go to the British Museum. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Reading Room. The British Museum, with its grand neoclassical architecture and hallowed halls, presented a stark contrast to the gritty docks. It was a place where silence was revered, where centuries of human knowledge reposed on countless shelves. The vast reading room, with its soaring dome and rows of silent scholars, felt like the very epicenter of accumulated wisdom. The grey afternoon had given way to an early evening, and the vast room was lit by the soft glow of reading lamps, casting pools of light on the worn oak tables. The atmosphere was one of quiet industry, of minds delving into the past. Poirot, ever respectful of intellectual pursuits, moved with an almost reverent quietness through the aisles, his keen eyes observing the scholars bent over ancient texts. He had come here, he explained, to understand the true significance of the word viridian and the archaic shipping manifests found in the locked suitcase. Japp, meanwhile, was endeavoring to track down information about Thorne's elusive, scholarly agent who frequented the docks. He had made inquiries at Thorne's bank and solicitor's office, but they proved unhelpful, citing client confidentiality. We sought out the head librarian, a prim and proper gentleman named Mr. Finch. No, not that Finch, I hasten to clarify, merely a coincidence of nomenclature, who directed us to a younger assistant librarian, Mr. Arthur Penhaligon. Mr. Penhaligon was a slender, nervous young man with spectacles, a perpetually anxious expression, and a somewhat stooped posture from years of bending over books. He was known for his encyclopedic knowledge of historical archives and maritime records. "Mr. Penhaligon," Poirot began, his voice a gentle murmur so as not to disturb the profound quiet. "We are investigating a matter connected to the late Mr. Julian Thorne. We understand he was a frequent patron here, conducting research into rather obscure historical subjects." Penhaligon jumped slightly at the mention of Thorne's name, nearly dropping a stack of reference books. "Oh, Mr. Thorne, yes indeed. A very dedicated, if somewhat demanding patron, always searching for the most recondite texts. He was here just a few weeks ago, actually." "Indeed?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And what, pray tell, was the nature of his recent inquiries?" Penhaligon wrung his hands, his gaze darting nervously around the room. He was researching a forgotten 17th-century expedition led by a Dutch cartographer named Willem Viridian, a rather obscure figure, supposedly vanished without a trace during a journey to the South Pacific. Thorne was particularly interested in the ship's manifest and any personal correspondence from Viridian. My breath caught. "Viridian!" I exclaimed, perhaps a little too loudly. Several heads turned in our direction, and Penhaligon gave a mortified gasp. Poirot merely gave me a warning glance, then turned back to the librarian. "The name? It is a significant one in our current inquiry. Mr. Thorne was researching a Willem Viridian?" "Yes," Penhaligon whispered, his voice barely audible. "He was absolutely obsessed. He claimed to have found a missing link in the Viridian expedition, a clue to a legendary lost cargo, something of immense historical and perhaps financial value. He spent hours poring over old maps, ship's logs, and the few existing journals. He seemed convinced that Viridian's ship, though officially lost, had in fact made it to a secret location where a treasure lay hidden." "And did he share the nature of this missing link with you, Mr. Penhaligon?" Poirot pressed. Penhaligon hesitated, chewing on his lower lip. "Not directly, no, but he did mention a coded message within a lesser-known painting, a portrait of Willem Viridian's wife, Eleanor. He believed the painting held a map or directions to the lost cargo. He was very excited, almost manic about it. He seemed on the verge of a major discovery." "Eleanor Viridian," I repeated, a thrill running down my spine. "The same name Miss Dove recalled from Victoria Station." Poirot gave a slow, satisfied nod. "So, the woman with the locked suitcase, Mrs. Eleanor Viridian, was not merely a namesake, but potentially a descendant of this very expedition leader, or even directly connected to his research, and the painting of his wife, Eleanor, holding a coded message." This is a most illuminating detail, Mr. Penhaligon. He was very secretive about it all, Penhaligon continued, his nervousness subsiding slightly as he warmed to the subject. He guarded his findings jealously. He often hinted that others were also seeking this lost treasure, and that he needed to secure it before they did. He even mentioned being in contact with someone who claimed to have an original drawing, a preliminary sketch of the painting, which might hold the key to the code. A preliminary sketch of the painting, Poirot mused. And this someone, did Mr. Thorne divulge their identity? Penhaligon shook his head. No, Monsieur Poirot. He only referred to them as an artist of questionable ethics but undeniable talent. He seemed to disdain them personally, but clearly valued whatever they possessed. The pieces were falling into place with a sudden, astonishing rapidity. The locked suitcase, the shipping manifests, the photographs of the explorer and his severe-looking wife, presumably Willem and Eleanor Viridian, the word Viridian on the parchment, the distressed Mrs. Eleanor Viridian at Victoria Station, and now the story of a lost expedition and a coded painting. Thorne had been on the verge of discovering a treasure, and someone else was clearly involved, an artist. Mr. Penhaligon, you have been most helpful, Poirot said, a glint in his eye. This artist of questionable ethics, we must locate them. They may hold the final piece of this rather intricate puzzle. For if Mr. Thorne was on the verge of finding a treasure, and someone else was seeking it, his death takes on a far more sinister hue. As we left the hushed sanctuary of the reading room and stepped back into the chill London evening, the gas lamps casting long, dancing shadows, I felt the familiar thrill of the chase. The mystery had deepened, yes, but the outlines of a motive were now beginning to emerge from the historical mists. Thorne had died, not merely for an antique, but for a hidden legacy, a secret tied to a long-lost expedition, and an artist who held a dangerous key. Chapter 6. The Artist's Canvas. With Mr. Penhaligon's revelation about Thorne's pursuit of a coded painting and his involvement with an artist of questionable ethics, Poirot's direction was clear. We had to find this artist. The world of antiquarian research was giving way to the bohemian, often volatile, realm of artistic creation. The next morning, Poirot, Jap and I found ourselves journeying to the winding artistic streets of Chelsea. The pervasive London greyness was momentarily held at bay by a crisp, cold breeze, and patches of clear sky offered glimpses of pale winter sun. The air was cleaner here, tinged with the faint aroma of turpentine and oil paints, a sharp contrast to the damp, industrial smells of the docks. We eventually located the studio of Mr. Leo Vance, a name Jap had managed to unearth through art dealers known to have worked with Thorne on restoration projects. The studio was nestled down a narrow, cobbled mews, a dilapidated building with large, grimy windows that seemed to absorb what little light there was. It felt like a place where obsessions were nurtured and boundaries blurred. Inside, the studio was a riot of color and chaos. Half-finished canvases leaned against walls, easels stood at odd angles, and discarded tubes of paint lay scattered amidst brushes and rags. The air was thick with the potent smell of oils and spirits, almost dizzying. Mr. Leo Vance himself was a man of intense, almost feverish energy. He was relatively young, perhaps in his late 30s, with wild, dark hair, paint splatters on his worn smock, and eyes that burned with a mixture of artistic passion and barely contained resentment. He was, to put it mildly, an emotionally expressive individual, quite unlike the stoic Henderson or the nervous Penhaligon. "Monsieur Vance," Poirot began, his voice calm amidst the artistic tumult, "we are investigating the unfortunate demise of Mr. Julian Thorne. We understand you had professional dealings with him." Vance bristled, throwing down a palette knife with a clatter. "Thorne? That old miser? What's he got to do with me? Dead, you say? Good riddance, I say. He was a predator, a vulture, preying on struggling artists like me." Jap stepped in, showing his badge. "Mr. Vance, Your candidness is noted, but we require answers. Mr. Thorne was apparently seeking a preliminary sketch, perhaps of a portrait of a woman named Eleanor Viridian. Do you know anything about this?" Vance froze, his eyes narrowing. His previous bluster seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by a wary guardedness. "Viridian? What do you know about that?" "That was private. Thorne was obsessed with it, yes. A painting, a portrait of a woman, 17th century Dutch. He believed it held a secret. He came to me because he knew I had a reputation for forgeries. He thought I might have copied it or knew someone who did." "Did you, Mr. Vance?" Poirot asked, his gaze fixed on the artist. "Did you provide him with a copy or a preliminary sketch?" Vance hesitated, then let out a frustrated sigh. "Not a copy. But I did have something. An old academic friend of mine, a real art history buff, came across a faded, rudimentary sketch, barely more than a scribble, but clearly of the same woman. It was attributed to a lesser-known apprentice of the original painter, supposedly a preparatory study. It wasn't worth much artistically, but it had these odd markings, little symbols that didn't seem to belong to the style. My friend dismissed them as an amateur's mistakes." "But Mr. Thorne did not," Poirot suggested. "No, Thorne's eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. He saw them as a code, a map. He paid me a pittance for it, mind you, that greedy old shark. But he was convinced it was the key to Willem Viridian's lost treasure. He said it would confirm the location, that it corresponded with something he had found in a shipping manifest." Vance pointed vaguely to a cluttered bookshelf. "So you sold him this sketch," I clarified. "And when was this, Mr. Vance?" "A few weeks ago. He was ecstatic. Said he was going to verify its authenticity with a historical expert, then use it to find the treasure. He even bragged that he had a contact who would bring him the original painting itself from abroad, after which he would be able to decipher the entire message." Vance scoffed, as if he deserved such riches. "This contact, did he mention a name?" Poirot asked, his voice low. "No, just that it was someone from the Viridian family, an elderly woman who was coming from France. Said she was bringing the original portrait as part of a family legacy transfer to Thorne, whom she believed to be a trustworthy guardian of history. Foolish old woman. Thorne was nothing but a thief of history." Poirot exchanged a significant look with Japp. It was clear now. Mrs. Eleanor Viridian, the woman from Victoria Station, was the contact. She had intended to bring the original painting to Thorne, along with the very suitcase we had found. But something had gone awry. "Mr. Vance," Poirot continued, "do you recall anything specific about the marks on the sketch? Any symbols, patterns?" Vance rubbed his temples. "Just geometric shapes, circles, triangles, in peculiar positions around the woman's head and hands, and a faint, almost invisible V scratched into the corner of the paper. It was subtle, easy to miss." "A V," Poirot repeated, a profound thought dawning in his eyes. "And the locket in the suitcase. It was unengraved, but the shape, a subtle V shape was implied in its clasp. And the word Viridian on the parchment. Hastings, it is becoming clear. These are not random clues. They are all interconnected." So, Thorne had the sketch, the shipping manifests, the historical research from the museum, and he was expecting the original painting from Mrs. Viridian, Japp summarized, all leading to a treasure, but he ended up dead, and the suitcase was left in his study, minus the painting. "Precisely, Japp," Poirot affirmed. "The question now is, what happened to Mrs. Viridian and the original painting? And who ensured that the suitcase, sans its most crucial component, ended up in Mr. Thorne's study? Mr. Vance, do you keep any records of Mr. Thorne's visits, any correspondence, however brief?" Vance rummaged through a pile of sketches, eventually pulling out a crumpled envelope. "Just this, a receipt he insisted upon, dated 3 weeks ago, and a note. He wrote that he had secured the final piece of the puzzle, and would be meeting his contact very soon to complete the acquisition. Poirot carefully took the note. His eyes scanned it, then his gaze drifted to a half-finished portrait on an easel, depicting a shadowy figure with a malicious grin. "Tell me, Monsieur Vance," he said, his voice quiet. "What did you truly think of Mr. Thorne's research? Did you ever consider seeking this treasure yourself?" Vance shrugged, a cynical twist to his lips. "The thought crossed my mind. Who wouldn't want a lost treasure? But I'm an artist, not an archaeologist. Besides, I always suspected Thorne had an inside man, someone working from within the hallowed halls of academia, feeding him information, someone with access to all the dusty old secrets." Poirot's head snapped up, his little grey cells whirring into overdrive. An inside man from academia. The nervous young librarian, Mr. Arthur Penhaligon, flashed into my mind. Could he have been more involved than he let on? "An inside man, you say?" Poirot murmured, a new light dawning in his eyes. "C'est très intéressant, Monsieur Vance. Very interesting indeed. I believe, Hastings, that we are on the precipice of understanding not just the what, but the who and why. The final act. It approaches. Chapter 7. The Final Deduction. The crisp chill of the London morning had settled into a damp, pervasive cold, the kind that makes one long for a roaring fire and a strong cup of tea. Poirot, however, was impervious to such discomforts when his little grey cells were fully engaged. He had orchestrated a small gathering, not at Scotland Yard, but at the elegant The Grand Salon, a rather exclusive café in Burlington Arcade, a place of hushed conversations and clinking china. He believed in the psychological advantage of a genteel setting for his revelations. Seated around a small ornate table, amidst the murmur of discreet chatter and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, were Jap, myself, and, at Poirot's specific invitation, Mr. Henderson, the butler, Miss Emily Dove, the ticket clerk, Mr. Arthur Penhaligon, the librarian, and Mr. Leo Vance, the artist. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension, each guest seemingly aware that they were part of a crucial denouement. Poirot, resplendent in his immaculate suit, cleared his throat, his eyes scanning each face, assessing their reactions. "Mes amis," he began, his voice calm, yet carrying an unmistakable authority. "We are here to conclude the perplexing affair of Mr. Julian Thorne and the locked suitcase. The facts on the surface were contradictory. A man found lifeless, no struggle, beside a mysterious case that seemingly appeared from nowhere." He paused, taking a sip of his hot chocolate. "We established that the suitcase belonged to an elderly lady, Mrs. Eleanor Viridian, who was travelling from France to meet Mr. Thorne, bringing with her an original painting, a portrait of Willem Viridian's wife, also named Eleanor. This painting, we learned from Mr. Penhaligon, was believed by Mr. Thorne to contain a coded map to a long-lost 17th-century treasure connected to Willem Viridian's expedition. Mr. Vance supplied Mr. Thorne with a preliminary sketch of this painting, which confirmed Thorne's theory of a hidden code. He then directed his gaze at Miss Dove. Miss Dove, you confirmed Mrs. Viridian's journey and her distinct luggage. You recall her mentioning meeting a gentleman of antiquarian interests in France, a trustworthy guardian of history, and expressed concerns about being watched. Mr. O'Malley, the porter, observed her taking the suitcase onto the ferry to France. Miss Dove nodded, her face pale. Here lies the central paradox, Poirot continued. If Mrs. Viridian took the suitcase to France, how did it reappear in Mr. Thorne's study, minus the crucial painting and without Mrs. Viridian herself? It is simple, yet cunning. Mrs. Viridian never made it to France with the suitcase, nor the painting. She was intercepted. A gasp went around the table. The shipping manifests in the suitcase, Poirot explained, were a red herring, or rather, a clue that confirmed the historic expedition but distracted from the present. The photographs were of Willem and Eleanor Viridian. The silver locket, unengraved, was a subtle tribute to the family V, and the word Viridian on the parchment, not a code, but a warning. A warning Mrs. Viridian likely intended for Thorn to confirm her identity and the urgency of her mission. His gaze sharpened, settling on Mr. Arthur Penhaligon. Mr. Penhaligon, you were privy to Mr. Thorn's fervent research into Willem Viridian's lost expedition. You knew of his obsession with the coded painting and the treasure it promised. Mr. Thorn mentioned an inside man in academia, someone who provided him information, and Mr. Vance mentioned Thorn had a contact who would bring him the original painting from abroad. That contact, we now know, was Mrs. Eleanor Viridian, the descendant. Penhaligon swallowed hard, his hands trembling visibly on the teacup. You, Mr. Penhaligon, are an ambitious scholar, Poirot stated, his voice devoid of accusation, merely stating a fact. You resented Thorn, perhaps, for his wealth, his ability to acquire knowledge without the toil you dedicated to it. You believed the treasure was rightfully yours for your intellectual contribution to its discovery. You saw an opportunity to intercept Mrs. Viridian, believing you could acquire the painting and decipher the code before Thorn. Penhaligon's face was ashen. He tried to speak, but no words came out. It was you, Mr. Penhaligon, Poirot pressed on, who approached Mrs. Viridian, claiming to be Thorn's legitimate agent. You convinced her to hand over the suitcase and the painting, promising their safe delivery. You then took the suitcase back to London. You removed the painting, intending to decipher the code yourself, perhaps planning to discover the treasure and present it to the world under your own name. But Thorn, growing suspicious, confronted you that very night in his study, having perhaps received a delayed message from Mrs. Viridian, or having pieced together your deception. He continued, his voice gaining momentum. You then panicked. Knowing Thorn would expose you, you committed a desperate act. You administered a fast-acting poison, perhaps slipped into his Earl Grey tea, knowing he habitually drank it in his study. Mr. Thorn collapsed, lifeless. In your haste and panic, you left the locked suitcase, now empty of the painting. Beside him, a cruel irony, as it was the very object that led to his demise and now, to your unmasking. The uniform layer of dust. You carefully wiped the case clean of any fresh fingerprints and then, to make it appear as if it had been there for some time, dusted it lightly with powder from Thorn's own desk, leaving the impression of natural accumulation. The lamp pointing at the wall. Not his book. A distraction as you quickly arranged the scene to imply a peaceful, natural collapse, rather than a confrontation. Mr. Penhaligon sagged in his chair, utterly defeated. Tears welled in his eyes. He would have taken all the credit, he stammered, his voice choked with emotion. He dismissed my theories, called them flights of fancy. But it was my work, my dedication to Viridian's legacy. I deserved it. Japp rose, a grim satisfaction on his face. Mr. Penhaligon, I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Julian Thorn. Anything you say. As Penhaligon was led away, a broken man, the cafe slowly returned to its gentle hum. Poirot, with a final contemplative sip of his hot chocolate, looked out at the busy arcade. The human heart, Hastings, he murmured, is a locked suitcase in itself, full of desires, resentments, and hidden treasures, and sometimes its secrets can be deadly. Another case closed, another triumph for the little grey cells. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey through the labyrinth of the locked suitcase mystery.